welcome you, sir. Good evening. Regression of diabetes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to talk to you again. Yesterday I talked about the mechanisms behind type 2 diabetes and its reversal. But we all have to live in the real world. And of course, that's just doctors. But our patients also have to live in the real world. And what I'd like to do in the next 20 minutes is to describe to you the practical aspects of delivering reversal of diabetes and hopefully long-term remission from diabetes. So once again, to start with, let me take you to Newcastle upon Tyne. Here we see the River Tyne. This is our beautiful Millennium Bridge. I think one of the most beautiful structures in the world, but perhaps I'm biased, and the other bridges behind. But of course, we're faced with a problem, taking someone with diabetes on one side of the river, crossing over to non-diabetes. So how do we do this? I mentioned yesterday 15 kilograms weight loss. That may seem an unachievably great weight loss, but it was what I estimated would be necessary to reduce the liver fat, reduce the pancreas fat, and make people clear of this disease. But how to do it? Now, I have an advantage because I've been listening to my patients talking about the difficulties with weight loss for well over 4 decades of medical practice. And I knew that there were 2 main problems. One was hunger. Nobody likes being hungry. And the advice to cut down moderately and to do that for life clearly does not work. The second problem identified was that of choice, the burden of choices. Can I eat this? How much is that? Is it really a level teaspoonful? The choices build up and it becomes a burden day on day. And eventually people just don't want to do that. So we had to invent something quite different. And it looked like this. I knew from some of the old studies that using a low-calorie diet was not associated with hunger. Once people had broken through the first 36 hours, yes, that required motivation. But after that, no hunger. And in fact, increasing well-being. This shows the particular diet we used in our first studies in Newcastle. Here we have a packet, there's breakfast, here we have dinner, and here we have lunch, excitingly made up in a pint of water. Now, this may seem rather harsh, and you might imagine that your patients will not accept that. But in fact, these shapes are quite filling. They're relatively high protein, and in the real world, people do accept this. Now, life isn't all about metabolism, and we have to keep the bowel happy as well, for which reason I suggested that we used a plateful of non-starchy vegetables in addition each day. And as a total, that came to just under 800 calories. So this was the basis of the diet, one that would be acceptable to people and we could roll forward in our trials. And indeed, in our first study, the average weight loss over 8 weeks was 15.3 kilograms. Now, why does it actually work? Why is it so successful? Well, the immediate gains are quite dramatic. People lose on average 3.5 kilograms in the first 7 days. Suddenly, they're able to get up out of a chair without saying, oof. That's a revelation. They can run upstairs. They haven't done that for years. And also, that underpinned the commonest feedback we got. After 1, 2, 3 weeks, people would say, I feel 10 years younger. Now, we were looking for a way to reverse diabetes, but we'd inadvertently stumbled on the elixir of eternal youth. So there is a big message here. This is a process which is auto-motivating. People feel so well, they experience increased levels of energy, they are not tired, and that is why it works. So this diet is pragmatic. It was meant to suit most people, but it's not the only diet. What matters is the weight loss. How you achieve the weight loss, if the person would prefer a different method, that's fine. And I know that the time course is not important, apart from the very human aspect. That is, it's far easier to do without for a defined period of time. If you know it's only for 8 weeks, or sometimes 12 weeks, depending on your aims, then you can do that. If it's for life, it's very difficult. So, this was the diet. What characterizes a successful diet? Well, first of all, it has to be simple. This diet certainly is simple, but it's not the only simple diet. It's got to be practical. Now, by practical, this brings us right into the family home, because people have to live there still. The rest of the family are eating normally. Hopefully, they will adjust things by no longer having biscuits and crisps in the cupboards. So the home does have to change a bit. And that underpins one of the big secrets of this. It's vital that the individual discusses this with spouse, partner, close friends, close family, because they need to be part of the whole effort. If that person doesn't have support, then it's much more difficult to get remission. If the person's spouse does not want them to lose more weight, it won't happen. Now that might seem a funny thing. Why would a person's spouse not want to lose weight? Well, perceptions vary. People choose the person they marry, and they don't want that to change, perhaps. So we have to think more widely than the person in front of us. We're actually treating part of a family. I've already mentioned the fact that this is time limited. It's just a diet to achieve this step change in weight from up here to down here. People know the target weight they're aiming for, usually 15 kilograms or 15% less than their current weight. So that's all very clear. But there's one point that I'd emphasize that causes a lot of anxiety amongst doctors, and that is, please, no additional exercise. Why not? Surely that burns calories. Well, it burns a trivial number of calories for these largely middle-aged, overweight people. And if people eat, if people exercise, if they start a new exercise program, they will indulge in compensatory eating. I only learned this by listening to our research volunteers in one of our exercise studies, and I was unaware of it before. But when I hit the literature, I discovered that compensatory eating is quite well described. This is why exercise as weight loss makes no sense at all for our population of people who are no longer young and are too heavy. So please, no exercise during the weight loss phase, because our goal is to lose weight, and that will be done by calorie restriction. And in the same breath, I have to say, exercise is really important as part of the ongoing prevention of weight gain. So, you see, there are two important things here, but they need to be pulled apart in time. And the usual shorthand message, to lose weight, you need to walk more and eat less, doesn't work in practice because you're mixing up two things. First, weight loss with calorie restriction, then a long-term business of importance of trying to increase daily walking at the same time as modest, ongoing restriction of calories. Let me just show you the trajectories of weight loss in the direct study in the various groups. In those people who did not achieve remission, there was unremarkable trivial weight loss, 5.8 kilograms. That may seem a lot if you're thinking about trying to use drugs for weight loss, though we're not there yet. But in terms of what we need to do, that was inadequate. But those people who I referred to yesterday, who did achieve remission, but then lost it, came down and went up. But for this afternoon, I'd like to concentrate on the people who stayed in remission. But just look at this. We have just this steady upward average trend. Now, averages are always misleading. People tended not to gradually slip away with their weight increasing. What happened was they were doing fine, and then a life event hit them. Family illness, perhaps, financial problems, the roof is leaking. All these problems are the real world. So what do we do about it? Well, we can plan ahead. And so, as part of that planning ahead, two things. First, the transition from a low-calorie diet. We discovered with our first study that people found it very difficult to go from a diet they liked, this weight loss diet, where they were feeling so good, back to normal eating. So we have to help them with that with a very slow, stepped food reintroduction, stopping one packet for dinner and eating a specified amount of food. People have to know in advance that they will end up eating less after the weight loss than they did before. They've become a smaller animal, and smaller animals need less calories to maintain the essential processes of the body. So people know that, and the food reintroduction phase has to be slow and gradual. But I mentioned the disasters of life, and for that reason, we had relapse management programs already ready to roll if they happened. So if people regained 2 kilograms, we would reintroduce one total diet replacement package instead of a main meal. And people tolerated that quite well, and usually in 2 weeks they would be back in line. But if the weight gain was more serious, then we would offer complete change back to the liquid diet. And people took up these offers because they were living in the real world, and it's difficult to think diabetes all the time, as we know. Now, you may say, that's all fine, but these are funny people living in a faraway land in Newcastle upon Tyne. Is it relevant to people in India? Well, very fortunately, I can say it is, because of the very nice study done by Dr. Bhatt and Dr. Krishnan, which showed that in the Indian population, your population, this is feasible. Now, they designed, very wisely, an appropriate, culturally acceptable form of this diet, and in fact it was, rather higher in calories, 1,000 calories, but the details don't matter. The only thing that matters is the weight loss. And over the period of study, 12 weeks, they had reasonable weight loss, and HbA1c fell in the group who responded. And here we see a non-diabetic HbA1c. Fasting glucose, 165 to 112. Fasting insulin. Now this is important, because fasting insulin is too high in type 2 diabetes. And with remission, it goes back to the normal range, which in our lab is less than 12. And indeed, in your own hands, in Maharashtra state, you got the fasting insulin nicely down to a nice low level of 10. So this is culturally adaptable. There is nothing different in people living here and in Newcastle from a metabolic point of view. We're all the same. And this study very nicely underpins it. Could I just point out that it is a relatively neat study, 12 people. Can we make conclusions from a study of 12? Yes. If that study is testing a prior hypothesis, if it's carefully designed and is powered to achieve statistical significance, if it shows that the treatment is effective, the effect size of the treatment is likely to be very great. Using drugs, we need very large studies because, frankly, any one drug has a pretty pathetic effect. But what we're talking about here is an effect size so large we can see it in a small group. And to make my point, could I just point out the most important study ever in type 1 diabetes? And that was 99 years ago, when Leonard Thompson had his first injection of insulin. One person, blood glucose does the impossible and drop, and the sugar disappeared from the urine from this young man. Never been seen before. Of course, it needed to be confirmed. That was easy. But you see, a study of n equals 1 is very important. Small studies, if well designed, can really make the point because they have an effect size which is relevant to your patient and to mine. So, back to the quayside at Newcastle. This is our brilliant concert hall, Sage Concert Hall. Across the river from Newcastle, it has a very unusual shape. These are windows. We're looking into the building through these windows, nicely reflected in the River Tyne. And I'd like to encourage you to reflect on some data you already know very well. And these are the data from the United Kingdom Prospective Diabetes Study. And I want to point out something that almost everybody has forgotten. The median BMI at diagnosis at entry to the study was 27. People were not obese to get type 2 diabetes back in the 70s and 80s when recruitment happened. So, together with Rory Holman, the keeper of the data for UKPDS, we wrote this paper describing this phenomenon and also describing what I'll now go on to show. Because in UKPDS, there was a first phase. It was a weight loss phase. It was designed to achieve 5% weight loss. Now, of course, if you do that, some people achieve 0.5%, 1%. Some people get 2 or 3 or 5. And a few people overshoot wildly and get 15 or 20. And that's exactly what happened. So, in fact, in UKPDS, after the first 3 months, 16% of the whole cohort had a fasting plasma glucose, which was clearly normal. And that was unrelated to body weight. And indeed, at 15 months, glucose was related to weight loss and nothing to do with anything else. So, how can we explain this? Let me just take you away from what is usually shown as a BMI distribution in a population, a smooth curve. Now, we don't have smooth curves in the clinic. We have individuals. So I want to represent this as separate blobs. Each blob is an individual with diabetes, and the blob is red to represent the diabetes. This is actually the distribution of UKPDS at baseline. Let's park it up there for the moment and take you on a thought experiment. What if these people each lost 15 kilograms? Then they would move over in this fashion. This person becomes that person, and so on. So we have a shift of the distribution. But forget the distribution, it's the individuals that move. And to make the point, let's just look at 3 individuals. So here we have Fred, here we have Mary, here we have Bill. Fred lost 15 kilograms and turned blue. He lost his diabetes. Mary did the same, and so did Bill. But if we ask a population expert what is going on, they might say that nothing's happened because Fred is still obese, BMI over 30. Mary is overweight still, hopeless. And Bill had no right to lose weight because he was normal BMI at the start. Now, Clearly, that is absurd. If a person has type 2 diabetes, they've become too heavy for their body. Whatever their BMI, they need to get it down. And often, it's getting it down to the BMI they used to have when they were 21. So we can now talk about the personal fat threshold per an individual. And this is a concept that your patients will lock onto. Mine certainly do. They like understanding the reason why they have diabetes and their friends who are fatter than them do not have diabetes. That's been a puzzle. This is the answer. So, Newcastle upon Tyne. I've shown you the River Tyne, but where does the name come from? Well, this is our Newcastle. It was completed in the year 1186, so every term is relative, but this is why we talk about Newcastle upon Tyne. And there's our lovely cathedral in the background. But how about the people? We studied ethnic Geordies, the people living around Newcastle. Would this work in other races? And I had the opportunity to repeat this study in Barbados. And just very briefly, despite the intense food culture in Barbados, food is a central part of all life. It's rude to refuse food going to someone's house. It's a problem. But nonetheless, by using this approach, we managed to get reasonable weight loss, 10 kilograms on average, after the 8-week period. After the follow-up of 8 months, we still had 8 kilograms weight loss, and in fact, we had remission 60% at 8 weeks and almost 40% at 8 months. So the biology is the same, because we could say, for those people in Barbados, Afro-Caribbean ethnicity, for those who lost 10 kilograms, 82% had achieved non-diabetic blood glucose control. So this is translatable to different environments. My colleagues in Barbados designed the dietary intervention to be culturally acceptable using vegetables that were available there. And my final picture of Newcastle draws the connection with India. Now, this is something that's probably not widely known in India. Certainly people in Newcastle don't know much about it. This shows some of the tops of our beautiful buildings, but here we have a monument. The square is called Monument, and on top of it there is a man called Grey. He was Prime Minister. He was a local man, and his first act as Prime Minister was to gather support and to abolish slavery in the British Empire. Now, that was a wonderful, far-sighted thing to do, but an Indian tea blender thought it was such a splendid act that he named his latest blend of tea after this man. His title was Earl. He was an Earl. So he was Earl Grey. This is Earl Grey tea. The man on top of the statue had nothing to do with making the tea, but it was named after him because of his noble political actions. So there we are. I've come from Newcastle to explain the name of this nice Indian tea. But this is an important slide for every one of you seeing individual people. When a person is sitting in front of you, preferably with newly diagnosed diabetes, how are you going to persuade this person that they might wish to embark upon significant weight loss? Well, you would want first to provide the information. The fact that at diagnosis they stand at least a 9 out of 10 chance of getting rid of their diabetes and not requiring tablets and not facing the risk of complications in the future. But they must talk about this with their family and friends. It's not a snap decision. They need to go away and think about it. So personal planning is absolutely essential to success. Facing up to achieving 15 kilograms of weight loss in this case, 3 months, but a defined period of time. And then we have the long-term support, because we cannot just discharge these people. They still need support from someone to maintain that weight loss, to provide rescue plans when necessary. So this is not cure, and I don't like the term cure. It's certainly remission. People will lose their macrovascular complications, they lose their weight-related risk of excess cancers, and we demonstrated both those things in the second year of the direct study. And that is well worthwhile continuing to achieve. So this is a recipe for doctors to follow. But how can I get the message out to the world? Well, I thought the only way to do that was to write a book for people with diabetes to read. And I'm sorry if this seems like advertising, but there is now an account of how to do it and what's actually going on. Because all of the concepts I've explained to you are written in lay language in this book in hopefully a readable fashion. It's easily obtainable on Amazon. And also, we have a website that I put together very hurriedly in 2011 because I had an absolute rush of emails asking for advice, how to do it.
Sir,
And
time is...
we put all the advice on the website. So those are the resources that can be used. I hope this book will be useful not only for the people with diabetes for whom it was written, but also for you, the doctors.